Hi, people! It's your Negro with aptitude and host of the Blackboard, Mickee Lee. Tonight, I'd like to introduce you to a new weekly series I'm finally putting up called the Weekly Wrap-Up. The Weekly Wrap-Up is designed to discuss 3 to 4 top trending topics that I think would be of most interest to you. For the most part, I will not be covering celebrity gossip, as that is of very little interest to me, and there are others out there who report on these topics in much greater detail than I would ever care to do. But I am making an exception with this series opener, and I will explain why later in this video. The main purpose of the weekly wrap-up will be to focus your attention on issues primarily related to our success in gaining reparations or to other issues that affect the quality of our lives in the United States and around the world, especially with rapidly changing social constructs and issues. I will not do a deep dive into these topics, but I will give you the highlights and enough links in the description box to get you started doing your own research. So let's jump into it. Tonight's topics are Will and Jada Smith, Indians Rule, Asian Intellect, and C19 regulations and your access to food. Just a few days ago, on July the 9th, I believe it was, last Thursday, the Supreme Court ruled that a large swath of Oklahoma belongs to Indian reservations. Now, before you black folks start hooping and hollering and say, yay, to our Native brothers and sisters, I want you to understand what took place and how it relates to our pursuit of reparations. The two gentlemen that you see featured here both committed crimes. The first one, who is a registered Creek Indian, though he looks like an ADOS member and probably is more ADOS than he is anything else. And the other gentleman, who is also registered to one of what is called the 5 civilized nations. Both of these gentlemen are convicted murderers and rapists. So in effect, what the native tribes did was to, on behalf of these two gentlemen, was to sue the state of Oklahoma and to challenge its rights to pursue a federal case against both of these guys that resulted in them doing jail time. In essence, what the natives argued was that any crime that was committed on a reservation was under the jurisdiction of that reservation to pursue and prosecute according to native law rather than U.S. federal law or Oklahoma state law. So in upholding the recent Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court in fact stated that the territories belonged to the natives as under the treaties that had been enacted as long ago as 1866. Now, why is this important for black folks? It should be obvious. Number one, if you study the history of both this case and what happened when these native tribes were uprooted from southern states, such as Tennessee or Kentucky. Please don't quote me on this particular case because, as I've said, I'm not doing a deep dive. But the basic point is these tribes wound up in Oklahoma as a result of the Trail of Tears. They wound up in Oklahoma because they were moved from the southern states, which had been their ancestral homes, and they were set up in reservations in Oklahoma, Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, other places, but the state in question right now is Oklahoma. So in doing so, the tribes were also paid money by the U.S. government as far back as in the 1860s and 1870s. They were paid money for these reservations. In addition, even though these are supposed to be sovereign nations, they heavily rely on the taxes of the rest of us who are not natives to subsidize the activities that happen on the reservation. So what the Supreme Court said, in effect, was that the treaties that were set up with these tribes were still in effect 160 years later, and that the treaties, what was called for in the treaties, which was a recognition of native sovereignty, would in effect be recognized by the United States under the Supreme Court in 2020. So this is a huge victory for them, even though the catalyst for it was protecting a rapist and a murderer. The takeaway for Black folks is we need people representing us in, on, and to the Supreme Court that will get our 40 acres and a mule right now, along with checks, yes, checks for what they owe for our labor to build this country. And there should be no more delay, and there should be no more people of color crap. There should be no more minorities. There should be no more black and brown, black and red, this other crap. Believe me, there is nothing you will find in your research about these native tribes concerning themselves with Black folks, even though the rapist, Mr. Patrick Murphy, who was convicted of rape and murder, even though he looks more like one of us, he is a registered tribal member. But they're not concerned with Black folks. And it is time we are very specific about our demands and that they belong to ADOS FBA. So I want you to do a little homework and check it out for yourselves. Our next story comes to us from California. Aren't you tired of hearing about California? I live in California and I'm tired of it. But in any event, this one has to do with what's called ACA 5. ACA 5 is a California state referendum that will be on the November ballot. Black folks, you better pay attention because this has to do with you. ACA 5 is an attempt, yet the latest attempt, to reintroduce affirmative action programs and affirmative action legislation in the public sector of California. This is in a response to AB 209, California legislation AB 209, which passed in 1997 and undid all of the affirmative action legislation that had been in place to that time. It in effect said that it was against the California Constitution for public institutions such as the University of California system to consider gender, race, or ethnicity when reviewing applications for jobs or public contracts or education. In other words, the types of students that could be admitted into the UC California system. Ever since that time, there has been one attempt after another to repeal AB 209, and it has always been soundly rejected by who? The white people? Who? The Hispanics? And yes, I know Hispanics is not a race, but for the point of it, I'm talking about Spanish-speaking people, of which California it has a heavy population. No, it has been soundly rejected by the Asian American community. Now, the truth is, most of these people considered Asian Americans are immigrants, and they have rejected any attempt to reintroduce affirmative action programs into the public sector of California. So, Black folks, you better pay attention, because in November you get a chance to vote and to say that you do want affirmative action to be part of the public institutions. Why? Because, number one, the only reason why most Asians have been able to even be considered for public employment or public education or any of these other things is because of the overall umbrella of civil rights legislation. So when you do some research on this, you will find that many Asians, such as the gentleman on the left, are saying that they have gotten their place in the United States because of merit, because they're able to take the test and they're able to pass the entrance exams and they're able to get high grades in the UC system, or they're able to place high in various public employment realms, etc. And so therefore, if affirmative action programs are introduced, it will reduce the number of slots that they are able to gain. Of course, they didn't think about this and didn't feel that way when Black folks were busy giving away civil rights legislation, which is in effect what happened. Civil rights means exactly what it says. Civil means the people. It does not mean the Black people, even though that's the way the United States Americans have digested it and put it forth. It means the people's rights. And that's exactly what happened to the civil rights legislation. That which was meant to begin the repair process of Black people, descendants of slaves in particular, was immediately hijacked by white women who claimed to be a minority. And they still do, even though there are more white women in the United States than there are white men. And after they were successful at it, then you had every single ethnic minority sign up for it. Then you had the gays. Then you had the disabled. Then you had on and on to the break of dawn. So that the group that is least benefited by affirmative action or civil rights legislation is Black folks, even though all of these groups try to use affirmative action and civil rights legislation to point and say that we use a government crutch. This is not the case. So I strongly suggest that you do a little research and that you strongly get your behinds out there in November. You're so busy worried about Trump, and I can guarantee you he will be the next president of the United States and the last. Yes, I said it multiple times. He is the last president of the United States as we know it. Wake up and smell the destruction. Not that this is President Trump's fault, because the United States has been being dismantled for decades now. But I digress. ACA 5, do your research, get your behinds out there and vote in November, and reintroduce affirmative action, and then make it your business to make it ADOS FBA. Let everybody else hold their own nuts. Next up, I want to make you aware of something that's going on. It's called COVID Pass, and it's a digital health passport. Now, once you do a little research, you will find out that this type of pass already exists in Asia, in particular China. And some of you all who still don't get the big picture will say, what's the big deal? Especially when you look at the COVID Pass website and they say, hey, all we want to do is stop the spread of COVID-19. And so we want a secure place where people's medical records can be privately held, but when they attempt to board a plane, for example, it can be scanned and we find out whether or not you've taken the vaccine or whether or not you have had a negative result on your COVID-19 test. Or perhaps if you want to enter a arena for a sports event, or perhaps if you want to go back to work in the office, or perhaps if you wanted to have your child in school. So all we're trying to do is protect your privacy while at the same time stopping the spread of COVID-19. Now, I have yet to do my video in depth on COVID-19, and I am really going to push myself to get it done this week so you can see the big picture. But if you are foolish enough to think that a COVID pass will maintain your privacy, and all it is doing is making sure that you don't spread the disease to other people, then you are delusional. Because it is only a hop, skip, and a very small jump to saying you can't enter this grocery store to buy food because you don't have a COVID pass. And we don't know if you've had a vaccine. And we don't know if you don't seem to have any symptoms, but we don't know if you've had a test. No, we can have your food delivered to your house where it can be left on the porch and where you don't have to interact with anybody because maybe the disease is around your house. I suggest you look this up, and I suggest that you read your Bibles where, for example, in Mark chapter 13, verse 12, it says how mothers will turn against daughters, fathers will turn against sons, children are ungrateful and disrespectful to parents. And elsewhere in the Bible, in Revelation, it talks about how family members will give up other family members to the state. You see, the stage was already set when you have family members and friends turn on people like myself who voted for President Trump. Now, that doesn't mean we agree with everything that President Trump has done or said, but it means that we saw a bigger picture and understood that if black folks were to get ahead at all, then the borders needed to be closed to immigration, all of it. Then the law should work for black folks, just like it works for these other people. Sanctuary cities should be dismantled. All of these amnesty, humanitarian efforts, refugee programs, all of it should be dismantled. And that includes from Africa. We understood that. And we understood we weren't going to even remotely get that with someone else in office. Now, COVID pass is coming. And whatever you see going on in China, you can be assured is coming to the United States. Do I think that President Trump is putting up enough of a fuss and a fight against it? No, I don't. But the stage was set when he was elected for this attitude and behavior to turn on your family members and friends and to shame your family members and friends into a particular type of behavior. Now it's continued with the masks. I've had it happen to me 3 times in the last 24 hours because I don't wear a mask when I'm outside, just walking around outside. But I've had people shout at me when they're across the street with a mask on. Why aren't you wearing your mask? You're a spreader of the disease. And the next thing will happen, just as the Bible foretold. You will not be able to buy your groceries, go into a store, go into a sports game, whatever it is, a public situation, without having one of these passes. Mark my words. I urge you to pay closer attention to real news rather than what's going on in these celebrity lives, rather than digesting the propaganda that the mainstream media is feeding you. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Finally, tonight, we get to the teaser topic, and I want to thank you for hanging out with me through the whole video or thus far. So, one of the top trending issues or topics this week is Will and Jada Smith and their Red Table Talk, their recent Red Table Talk in which they discuss the issue of Jada Pinkett Smith's entanglement with a singer, rapper, whatever he is, named August something another. Can't remember his last name. Now, if you watched the video, which I did see part of it, because I happened to be watching another YouTuber who presented it, Mrs. Smith had a hard time calling it a relationship, though apparently that's what she was in. And apparently Mr. Smith is playing the role of the understanding husband. I told you that I will not be reporting on celebrity gossip in general, so why am I talking about this? For this simple reason. As I say on the title to this, we need to pray for Will and Jada. We do not need to copy them. It disturbs me greatly that a number of YouTubers that I saw do a video on this topic were either saying that Mrs. Smith had done nothing wrong, though she did cheat on her husband, and that in fact makes her an adulteress. And if she has received forgiveness from her husband, that's fantastic. But she still needs to go before the Lord and receive forgiveness, or she will leave this life and enter eternity as an adulteress. The other disturbing thing that I saw was that people were saying the Smith marriage is something that Black folks should be proud of, and that it is a marker of success for Black people, and that Black people look up to the Smiths. Now, the Smiths are human beings just like you and I. They have their wonderful attributes, and then they have their not so wonderful attributes. And every single human being commits sin, which is an offense before God, every single day. Large or small, great or unknown, rich or poor, we all commit offenses before the Lord. I have not really been one that has been a fan of Will and Jada Smith, not what they represent to me. I find them to be very dangerous, their beliefs to be very dangerous, those that they have exposed and discussed publicly, and I find the fact that neither one of their children have apparently graduated high school, and both appear to me to be emotionally and mentally disturbed. I'm not so much sure about the son that Mr. Smith had with his first wife. But I am saying in general, this is not a family that any of us should be emulating in their current state. This is a family we should be praying for. This is a family we should be urging to go before the Lord and to repent and ask for the gift of salvation. This is not a family that we should be holding up as the model of Black folks. Now, as entertainers, their products are debatable to me. There are some Will Smith products that I've liked in the past. There are some movies that both Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith have been in that I've enjoyed, songs that Will Smith has done that I've enjoyed. I am merely speaking about them as a family unit and what they have publicly been involved in. This is nothing for us to copy. This is something for us to pray for them to get right-mindedness, to come before the Lord in repentance. And this is something, their tale is something that should be cautionary to us. If they are in fact involved in an open marriage, then it's not a marriage. Any situation taking vows before the Lord that does not contain one man and one woman is not a marriage. One man and one woman of adult age who understand the vows they're taking, that's not a marriage. So if we're going to be the people of the book, and the book for me is the Bible, then let us be those people. Let us shun all wickedness. That doesn't mean we don't pray for these people, that we don't lament before the Lord for them and ask Him to help them come to Him and ask for forgiveness. But it does mean that we should be turning aside and making it clear that we don't value this interpretation of marriage. We don't value this interpretation of family life. We don't value behaviors that would be an offense to the Lord. Make up your mind, folks. Time is short, and this channel exists to try to help to reason with you and help you to come back to the Lord while you can. That's it for this week's weekly wrap-up. I'm your Negro with Aptitude and host of the Blackboard, Mickee Lee. Please like, share, and subscribe. And do get in the comment section and let me know what you think of this new series and of the topics that I've discussed tonight. See you next time.